Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode about the intersection of occupational therapy and the ALS journey. My name is Maddie Kraus, and I'm a third-year occupational therapy student from Duke University working with ALS United Illinois. This podcast is targeted toward providing additional support for caregivers, but welcomes all who may benefit from exploring how daily routines, roles, and identities shift over time. Whether you're newly navigating this journey or have been walking it for years, my hope is that this space feels grounding, practical, and honest. Occupational therapy reminds us that what we do every day shapes how we feel, and when those daily occupations change, it makes sense that we feel it deeply. Today, we're talking about transitions, the visible and invisible ones, and how we adapt, grieve, and find stability in routines that may look different than how they once did. I also want to take a moment to highlight the wonderfully created Caregiver Bootcamp videos, which offer guidance across a wide range of topics from personal care considerations and nutrition to ventilation, palliative care, and hospice. ALS United also hosts a variety of support groups that can help you find connection and build community along the way. You do not have to navigate these transitions alone, so let's dive in. All right, so once again, my name is Maddie, and I am an occupational therapy student from Duke University. I'm here today with my colleague, mentor, and friend, Anna, who works for ALS United Illinois as a care services coordinator. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Maddie. I'm Anna Zelinske, and I am with ALS United. I'm under the Illinois, Indiana, and Missouri umbrella, but I am a care services director for the Missouri and Southern Illinois sections of our catchment area. I am a certified rehabilitation counselor, a certified case manager, and also an aging life care advanced professional. I've worked in this field for more than 25 years, which is kind of unbelievable that it's been that long. But I've worked with people across the disability field in all kinds of areas, and a lot of work, particularly around people who are having to navigate all of the change that happens with a progressive disability or disease.
Wonderful. And that's kind of a perfect segue. We're here today to talk about transitions. And I really wanted to emphasize that transitions aren't just about what changes, but they're about how we navigate change, feel our emotions, and move into a new season of life. So as you all may know, ALS progression is a journey full of moving targets. Mealtimes, morning routines, communication, sleep, mobility, they'll all change and then change again. So as a baseline, if you can expect your routine to change every few months, and then, like I said, change again. And I just wanted to remind you that this is not a failure on your part as a caregiver or the person with ALS's part. It's just a natural part of the disease progression. A quick tip here at the beginning of the episode is to allow flexible timing for care tasks, especially when adapting to new routines rather than rigid schedules. This allows for built-in grace and compassion. So that was just a little tidbit to get us started. But I think, Anna, one of the questions that we wanted to start off talking about are routines worth protecting. So what are some routines as you navigate this ALS progression and journey that are worth protecting, even as care needs increase and tasks become a little bit more demanding?
I think when we think about routines, it isn't necessarily even in the context of ALS. When we just think about as human beings how reliant we are on our routines, when something like a diagnosis or disability or something changes the way we are able to complete those routines, it can send us into kind of a panic, right? Like we have so many things throughout our day that it's just a habit. You wake up, have your morning routine, brush your teeth, get dressed, do all these things. And there are these little pieces. And when your body goes through a physical change or disability, like an ALS diagnosis, it changes the way that we can do these things. And there are some routines that it's okay. It doesn't really matter if that routine changes or, it can be flexible, you kind of roll with it. But there are certain ones that mean so much to us that we really have to work extra hard to make sure we put a plan in place to keep those routines first and foremost. Like we are going to find a way to make this routine work.
And I think from an occupational therapy lens, protecting the routines that are tied to identity and connection, and even zooming out from the occupational therapy lens, just as a human interacting with another human, like you said, we're so tied to our routines, but we're also tied to each other. So things like shared meals, even if they're modified. Listening to music or watching a TV show together, a prayer or quiet time can be something that's really important for people to share. And I know you had mentioned that one couple that you served, their cup of coffee in the morning was really important. So maybe you could share a little about that.
Definitely. So actually, for her, it was her making her own cup of coffee. That was actually the routine that she was really missing when I first met with her. Her husband was very kind, was a very, very connected caregiver, and was doing everything he could to help her as she progressed through her disease process. But he was not a coffee drinker, and she was, and it meant a lot to her to have this coffee. And when she was no longer physically able to make the coffee with the coffee pot anymore, he actually started going to the store and getting coffee and bringing it to her. And she was so appreciative of him doing this, but it wasn't good coffee. She really had a hard time kind of explaining that. So I helped them sort of navigate that conversation. But really what it came down to is her being able to make her own cup of coffee is what meant the most to her. So we were able to come up with some accommodations so that he would prep the coffee maker, and all she had to do was push the button. But even just having that little bit of input and choice and control into that routine was really, really meaningful to her. And so extra effort was put into place to make sure she could hold on to that.
Yeah. As a coffee drinker myself, if you don't have it the way that you're used to having it, it can really throw off the day. But like you said, her husband was really kind and tried to fill in the gaps where he thought were necessary. But that just emphasizes that communication through this whole process is really important. Even just breaking down and having conversations about, cups of coffee or what you want to watch in the evening time on TV or things like that are just
exactly
really important.
Exactly. And I don't even know that we always know which routines are the most important to us until they're interrupted somehow. When my husband and I first moved in together before early in our relationship, I remember there was a time he ate dinner without me. Like I came home from work and I was like, what are we doing for dinner? And he was like, oh, I ate already. And my feelings were so hurt because I grew up in a household where we always ate dinner together, and like all of our connection and sort of after a long day being away, our coming back together was over meals. And so when he didn't do that, my feelings were so hurt. But so anyway, we had a conversation about it, and now we've been together for 25 years, and food and mealtime is still a very important routine for us that we definitely talk about and make sure we maintain that routine.
I think it's it's a staple in a lot of people's households. I grew up in a house where it was very much the same. And even as, we got older and our routines changed just naturally, whether people were going to sports practice or club meetings or whatever, it was really important to my mom and to my dad that, if one kid was sitting at the table eating before somebody had to take them to the next thing, just how was your day? What did you learn at school? Things like that. And just those simple conversations as that time passes and you don't really even think about it, but it's really important. And I think to me, that would be a routine that would be worth protecting as well. I know some people also really find it important. And, as I'm back home with my parents now, I've kind of taken on this role of feeding the dog or feeding whatever kind of pet that you may have. And I just wanted to highlight there are actually really these cool machines that you can load the food into all kind of at once, and kind of like a coffee pot where you press the button and it'll dispense the amount that you need, like a Keurig or something like that. The age of technology, we've come up with all of these great ways so that somebody who may have ALS or any kind of disability can still prioritize that connection with their animal and being able to be the one that says, I will let them know when it's dinner time and I'm going to give them their food, because animals really do connect with you over that. And so I just thought that was something I came across that was, interesting and kind of relevant to what we're talking about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And people who are living with this disease or caregiving for someone who's living with this disease, they don't have to be experts on all of those accessibility pieces. They're the expert in their own problem solving and desires and routines. And so sharing whatever that problem is with someone like an occupational therapist or a care services professional in the field, we're the creative problem solvers. We just have to know what the problem is so that we can access our toolbox to help come to a solution.
Exactly. And, again, from an occupational therapy lens and even a care services lens, we want to adapt how these routines are completed if need be, rather than eliminating them completely. So you can shorten, simplify, or increase the level of assistance, as you're moving through these routines that still allow them to be completed. It might just look a little bit different. And I think that's one of the harder bits to handle as you're going through major changes with any facet in life, is that things aren't always going to look the same, but it is possible. And what I want to really highlight for people is that it is possible to still complete things. Like you said, you have all these creative problem solvers that have toolboxes and are just waiting at clinic to be able to help you. And even if it's something simple like feeding the dog or making a pot of coffee in the morning, we're more than happy to help.
Exactly.
Another thing we wanted to talk about is balancing dignity and efficiency, as well as connection, while providing substantial care for a loved one. Kind of transitioning into this, I say the word transitioning as we're talking about transitions, but we're naturally, as this disease progresses, the person with ALS is going to be needing some more assistance. And they highlight this really well in the personal care considerations section of the Caregiver Bootcamp. There's lots of, adaptive equipment that can be utilized into this process, but just from a person to another person point of view, I've been in situations where, after a surgery or something, I've needed some more care, but I've also been in some more formal caregiving roles where I've provided a lot of care to a person, even with simple things like rolling over in bed. And I just always thought it was really important to narrate what I was doing, give the person a heads up, and kind of preserve their autonomy where you can. So even just something simple like, hey, you're going to feel my hand under your shoulder and under your waist, and on the count of 3, we're going to roll you towards the wall. I'm going to give your pants a little tug. You'll feel them go up over your hips. And then you'll come back towards me and we'll repeat the whole process. And that's how we're going to get your pants up today. To me, that was something that was really important, and being able to provide that like safety and also that foresight into what was going to be happening while doing the care task, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think that there's a certain level of dignity and independence that we all seek as humans. We want to, and it's all little decisions that we might take for granted even, right? Like, what do we want to wear for the day? Or what route do we want to take to work? Like, all of these decisions. And as a person progresses through an ALS diagnosis, often their ability to have control over those decisions gets more minimized, mostly because they're relying on other people to help them do things. And so part of it is really encouraging any caregiver, whether it's a family caregiver or a paid caregiver, to really be sure to honor the person's ability to have control over the things that they can control. And it's actually a lot more than people might realize through those little decisions over how those morning routines or driving routines or dressing routines are actually completed.
Exactly. And for me, one of the things that, as I mentioned, I've had several surgeries where, different parts of my body were impacted, and at different times in my life, particularly when I was a teenager. But for me, one thing that's really important is what I wear and how I do my hair. And I've, had times in my life where I wasn't able to even lift up my arms to be able to do my hair the way that I wanted to. And so just kind of having been in those positions, and I think a lot of people can relate to, having shortened periods of time where they might experience that. But it just really highlights to you how important, like you said, all those little choices are. And we don't realize how many decisions that we make in a day until you're kind of forced to take a step back. And as a caregiver, I think it can feel overwhelming because you're making almost sometimes double the amount of choices. But just like you said, really preserving the autonomy and the dignity where you can, and taking the time to offer the choice when you're able to.
Yep, exactly.
Another, bullet point that we wanted to talk about was building moments of connection during the care tasks. As caregivers, you'll spend a lot of time of your day providing that one-on-one care to your person with ALS. And small things like eye contact, humor, music, they can all make a difference. And I don't know if you've seen that play out kind of in your care services role at all between the people that you work with.
I have, and I think that can sometimes be a signal of when a transition needs to happen, is when a connection is missed, or when something has changed and it feels different between is that what we're talking about now? That kind of, yeah. I think, this actually happened to me. So all of us find ourselves in caregiving positions at times, I think, throughout our lives, whether that's aging parents or as a parent, or if your loved one has some kind of a disability or a need, or in this case, of course, if somebody has ALS and they have a caregiver who they're relying on, the opportunity for connection and the break in that can sometimes signal that a routine needs to change. So I'll give a quick example of something that just happened last week for me. So I have a teenager who's 17, and they're busy, obviously, right? Like always have something to do. And our times were just missing each other. And I realized I hadn't seen my teenager in a while, like real meaningful, actual connection. And my routine in the morning is I always wake up and I go out into our living room and I sit down and I have my hot cup of tea in the morning. And when I realized that I'd been missing connecting with my kiddo, I noticed that in the morning, they spend a lot of time in the kitchen kind of getting their stuff ready. And so I just sort of moved my station from having my tea in the living room to having my tea at the kitchen table. And it created this opportunity for us to connect. So it was my routine. It wasn't really my routine needed to change. Like I felt like I was missing something. I really needed to have this connection with my kiddo. And so I was still able to have my hot cup of tea, but it created an opportunity for us to connect together.
I think that's wonderful. And I know one thing for my family that's important to connect over is we're a big sports family. And so college basketball season is upon us. If you tune in, but that's just one point of connection that, I go to Duke, my sister goes to Kansas. We have teams that we follow, and so it's a point of connection for us as well, is to, know what the schedule is for the week and try and watch those games together. But there are inevitably times where maybe I've got to go out and babysit, or my mom stays late at work and it kind of throws the routine off. But just prioritizing the moments of connection where you can, even if it's sitting and having a cup of tea while your teenager kind of buzzes around you in the morning, or, coming together at the end of a long day and watching college basketball. Everybody has their different things, but I think, and like you had mentioned, as you get older, with a parent and kiddo dynamic, things just change so much because of how busy kids are and, parents' work schedules and all of those things. But just like how we're familiar with those transitions kind of naturally through life, I think that you can take the signals in more of a caregiving role and just tune into things that may have been alerting you before and just realize, what, this is the same, it's telling me the same thing now. And so maybe a way to kind of connect better could be playing some music, or talking about a fun memory that you have while you're changing. I love putting the music on while I'm getting ready, so that's kind of where my brain goes. But
so when we're thinking about, I mentioned like I had this just feeling that I knew something needed to change in order to connect better with my loved one. So from an occupational therapy perspective in the ALS kind of world, what are some signals or signs that people might see that is a signal to them that a routine needs to change?
Yeah, so like we've kind of touched over just briefly, there are some telltale signs: increased frustration, avoidance or feeling dread of certain tasks or times of the day, and physical exhaustion or pain from providing a certain level of care during a certain part of your routine. And it's really important, kind of like how you demonstrated, Anna, to ask yourself when you notice that something is off, is it a problem with the task, the timing in which the task is being completed, or the level of support being provided? And in your case, it wasn't really any of those, it was the location. And that's another really great example of something that could be off. Maybe you're trying to get dressed in the bathroom, but the bathroom is obviously not a big enough space. So let's move out into the bedroom and try and, lay out some clothing options, allow the person to pick as much as they can, and also give ourselves some more physical space. And I think that same thing can go for a lot of other things. So once again, just as the problem, the task, the timing, the level of support being provided, or even the location, or, the time constraints that we're putting on ourselves. Is it too rushed? Is it too, do I need to be providing a little bit more help? And like you said, we can feel when something's off. So if you're feeling a little bit more frustrated, or like, ooh, I just really am not looking forward to that time of day when I have to help my loved one do their morning routine. Well, take a step back and ask yourself what could be changed to make that more beneficial. Because if you're feeling it as the caregiver, it's likely that your loved one with ALS is also feeling it too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so kind of going more into the physical and emotional toll of transitions, we touched on this briefly, talking about, experiencing frustration or avoidance, dread even. When these transitions come about, there is a lot of emotional and physical burden that they can take. And I know, Anna, we've talked about in previous conversations, kind of exploring, why do transitions take more of an emotional toll than a physical one often? And, from what I've read in the literature and, just different things that I've done to prepare myself for this podcast, it's kind of come across that loneliness and isolation are prevalent during transitionary periods, especially including after diagnosis. So these emotions in the person with ALS and in the caregiver can be linked to adverse health effects like stress, high blood pressure, and decreased reports of quality of life. Quality of life can kind of be an abstract topic, but it's, if you just think about your life under an umbrella and all the different facets that go with it, just feeling good and feeling like you've got everything under control is kind of what quality of life means, because I've gotten questions about that before. And Anna, maybe you want to speak to, you've worked a lot with families, and what are some emotions that might come up during these transitionary periods?
Things I've heard before is, when the initial diagnosis comes, it often is with very, very mixed emotions, because often a person has been seeking answers to why they're having these physical experiences. And so some of it is finally we get an answer, but then the answer is ALS. And so it's this very kind of difficult perspective to hold those two things at the same time. Relief for finally having an answer, but the answer is not what anyone would ever hope for. And so initially, I think there is some of that relief, but then there's the realism, I guess, or what of the progression that's going to happen over time. And I've heard people say that once they get used to one change, before they know it, they're already on to the next change. So it can feel very fast and it can feel very uncertain. And I think that a caregiver is grieving at each of these, and along with their loved one, they're grieving the loss of these independence and ability to do these certain tasks. And all of that is normal. It is a normal part of this to have all of those feelings at these levels of transitions. I also think that that's where a supportive therapist can come into place, whether that's an occupational therapist or a therapist who's there to help treat any kind of emotional pieces that are going along with it. And then professionals in the care services realm who can help folks find access to different pieces of equipment or different problem solving to hold on to some of those tasks. Because I think that is what people are most kind of worried about letting go of this is, if I bring on this piece of equipment to help me do this task, that means I'm getting worse, as opposed to I'm bringing on this piece of equipment and it's going to allow me to be able to do more things on my own for longer. So there's all kinds of emotions going on. And I just want to make sure we normalize all of that, that any emotions that go along with what happens as this disease progresses and a person navigates these transitions from the way things were to the way they're becoming is all understandable. And I hate to use the word normal, but really it is.
Yeah, I understand that, not to overuse the word, but it is understandable. And just like I want to encourage people, these transitions are new under the scope of experiencing an ALS journey and experiencing an ALS diagnosis. But humans, we've gone through so many transitions throughout our life, and often, even under or removed from an ALS diagnosis, transitions can feel heavy. They can feel anxiety provoking. They can feel sad. And like you said, just really normalizing that and getting people to understand that it's okay. It doesn't feel okay because it doesn't feel good to have those emotions. But it's kind of what you're supposed to be feeling in these times. And it is, it's justified, it's valid. And you touched on something that I thought was really important, and taking the time to adapt to new pieces of equipment, whether it's a wheelchair or a new piece of equipment that can help you with feeding or even ventilation. All of those things feel like, so as we were talking about adapting those pieces of equipment, whether it's ventilation equipment, mobility equipment, eating and feeding equipment, it can feel really scary and feel like you're losing independence in those moments, and maybe even feel like your loved one is losing independence as you're helping facilitate those transitions. But as an OT and PTs and speech therapists, we are really providing that equipment to ultimately increase independence and help facilitate a better quality of life. Like I hate to keep using that broad kind of mystery term of quality of life, but studies have shown that by adapting and accepting these pieces of equipment, people's quality of life actually increases. They might be able to do more for themselves than they were before. For example, if you're using a walker and you're falling a lot, it's probably a sign that it's time to transition to the next piece of mobility equipment, which the physical therapist and the occupational therapist through your clinic can help you recommend. And it might feel like a tug of, oh, I'm losing this, but really you're gaining so much more. And like I said, studies have just really shown that early adoption and being prepared and learning how to use those pieces of equipment before it's actually time can do wonders on impacting the quality of life of the caregiver, the person with ALS, and everybody around them, because the goal is to be able to participate in as much of the things that you love as you can. And so that's where we're coming from as therapists and recommending these devices. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly.
Yeah, it's so true, because I think that if a person, let's use a phone, for example. So a person maybe has bulbar onset and their speech is impacted. But before they're still able to use their speech, they're still able to communicate. The people who know them best are still able to understand them because of what we know about this disease, because we know it's progressive and that speech is likely going to get more and more difficult to understand and to use. In beginning to use a text app or a text-to-speech app early makes so much sense, because you don't actually need it quite yet. And so you could do both. You could use your verbal skills and the texting at the same time to work through exactly what it is that you will need to have later on if you're not able to communicate with speech at all anymore.
100%. And I think learning how to use, whether it's a piece of mobility equipment or a piece of speech equipment, learning how to use it early can actually give you the confidence and the skills necessary to be able to use it when it is time. And I think it can help kind of destigmatize the transition. If you're familiar with these pieces of equipment that you're going to be integrating into your life. It just helps. Again, it helps the caregiver, it helps the PALS, the person with ALS, feel more confident and more comfortable, and ultimately helps piece together pieces of independence, which is really important.
Yeah.
Alrighty. I think another thing we wanted to talk about was, a lot of people have wonderful villages full of people who are kind of knocking down at the door and they want to help. And Anna had attended a caregiver group where they had kind of talked about this and asking caregivers, well, what's the best way to tell your village that how to help during these transitions? And I think that can be kind of a overwhelming feeling for people because they don't necessarily know what they need help with. But I think we had walked away with some good tips if you wanted to share.
Sure. At first, I think I want to say that asking for help is never easy for any of us. But if somebody asks me for help, I'm more than happy to jump in and help. And I actually feel honored that a person would ask me, especially during a time where they're really struggling. And so I encourage people to think about the other side of that, of being the person who's asking for help. You're really giving another person a gift, the gift of being able to help you and to be able to contribute to your situation in a supportive way. So I like to have people think about it differently because I know it's very difficult for me to accept help. And I know I'm not the only one out there where that's true, right? But yeah, one of the tips was to have a list on the refrigerator and maybe a $20 bill or something, so that if a person says, what can I do to help? How can I help? You have a list of things that either you need to buy from the store, or it could even be a list of ways that a person can help, like certain things. Maybe you need the lawn mowed, or, having someone come and let the dog out on certain days, or the shared calendar, which I know we've mentioned about meals and things like that. It is so valuable because it also takes the guesswork out, because it's also really difficult when you're going through something to have somebody say, let me know how I can help, because it does sort of put another thing on your plate, which is managing what they can do for you, which is sometimes feels like just another task where it's like, I'll just do it myself because I don't have to manage that. But people want to help, and they're especially going to come out and offer help at the beginning. And by giving those folks little tasks, they will stick around and keep offering that help because they feel like they're contributing and have a way to be able to help.
100%. And I really liked how you mentioned even just making a list of things that you might need help with, or a list of things that you always need from the store. You might create a stockpile of 20 boxes of Kleenex in your pantry, but eventually that you're going to get through them. And like you said, it just really validates the person who's asking to help. And later down the line, they'll stick around and they'll still be there offering their help and their support, which I think is kind of a universal experience when people are going through something. They have a lot to help, or a lot maybe that they need help with, but they have a lot of people who are asking to help, and kind of reducing the mental load on the caregiver is just simple things like writing a routine or a checklist down, like you said, shared calendars, writing down lists of ways that people can help, task stacking. And so, maybe you sit down and you block 20 minutes out and you're going to refill the medicines, and you're going to make that one phone call that you've been just kind of putting off. And you really, whether it's calling somebody back, making an appointment, you just kind of want to limit the decision fatigue by being as prepared as you can. And I think caregivers are wonderful at this naturally. You step into this role and you become the master organizer, and it can feel really heavy. But just taking the time to, I think I've even started, working on this project, like creating a list of, okay, well, Monday I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Tuesday, I wanted to get to this thing on Monday, but I didn't quite get there. So I'll put that first on my list on Tuesday. And just having the lay of the land and an order in which things go can help, so I don't get to a moment where I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do next. Well, I look at my agenda or my list and I have it ready to go. And it just, like I said, takes away that decision fatigue, which is very real in a society where you have to make so many decisions, and also in the life of a caregiver where you may feel like you're making double the amount of decisions, like we mentioned earlier.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And I think, kind of we're getting near the end of our topics that we wanted to talk about, but this is a really wonderful discussion. And we have talked about, normalizing and validating any emotion that across a large spectrum that caregivers may be feeling. But we also wanted to talk about giving caregivers the permission to rest without guilt. And so something that in my personal life, I've even caught myself telling my friends this, rest is a necessity. It's not a reward. You don't have to do something to earn what, if you have the time. You don't have to have run a marathon to earn a 20-minute cat nap or to go to bed at a reasonable hour. And I think that can be a really important reminder for caregivers. I talked about this a lot in my last video, the burnout prevention through sleep, but rest is just as powerful of a tool as everything else. It allows your brain to reset. It allows your body to reset. It's good for the soul.
Exactly. And I think that sometimes caregivers can feel some guilt around resting, as like there's so much to get done. There's so much that a person has to do. When a person's caring for someone with ALS, and maybe they're also caring for children or also caring for aging parents, I mean, it's just there's only so much of us we can give, and only so much time in the day. And so I think that often we can say, I don't have time to rest. I just don't have time to do it. But it is so valuable and so important. And yes, like you mentioned in the last video about putting our mask on first, we truly cannot provide good quality care to another person unless we are caring for ourselves. So it really we have to build in that piece of rest, even if it's 5 minutes of closing your eyes in between, or arriving at an appointment 15 minutes early so you can sit in the car for 10 minutes and just doom scroll through your phone, or close your eyes, or just sit still and listen to the birds, right? Just like something that gives a person back a little bit of that self-care and time that we all deserve.
100%. And like I mentioned in the last video as well, The Unexpected Journey is written by Bruce Willis's wife, Emma, and has just been a really wonderful read. So I highly recommend it. But early on in the book, she says, one of the hardest things that I've learned about caregiving is that taking care of myself I'm not taking care of myself instead of taking care of my loved one. I'm taking care of myself for them so I can show up and be the best version of myself for them. And you can't pour from an empty glass. So you have to take the time to refill your own cup. And like you said, whatever that looks like, whether it's going on a walk, whether it's taking 5-10 minutes and just shutting your eyes, when you can. And another helpful tip that we learned from the other meeting was scheduling rest breaks like an appointment. And this is where you can use a shared calendar. You can, call in your army of helpers and just say, hey, I need an hour on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Well, what are you going to do? It's just for me to rest. And that's an okay answer.
Right, exactly. And there are different resources out there too, depending on where a person lives, what state they're in, what kind of opportunities are through their ALS organization that supports them. We sometimes have funding that can help pay for a respite grant, that where a person can truly have a break and have a person who is skilled and trained in caring for a person with ALS to come into the home that can provide that services and support so that the full-time caregiver can have a little bit of a break.
Yes, and that's one of the really wonderful resources that I've enjoyed learning about. Because as an outsider to the ALS United organization, I didn't know that those things existed, but by kind of immersing myself with you all and learning the wonderful services that you offer, those grants are just lifesavers for people. And And like you said, depending on where you live and a bunch of different factors. But it is an available resource, which I think is really important to highlight.
Yes.
And kind of as we wind down even further, do you have anything that you would want caregivers to know about the transitions that they're facing now?
Gosh, we've covered so much. I think, though, that transitions are a part of life. And the ones that come along with ALS, no one signed up for, no one asked for. It's a part of our individual journeys. And it isn't something that people have to go through alone. There are plenty of people out here through our organization at ALS United, through therapists like you, occupational therapists like you, through clinics. There are people here who can help a caregiver and a person living with ALS to move through these transitions as seamlessly as possible. And I think seeing it as a challenge that you don't have to go through alone, hopefully does give it a little bit more peace around having to go through those transitions, because it is not easy. None of this we're talking about is easy. It's very, very difficult. I think we make it sound easy, but it is very, very difficult and very challenging, and we are here to help.
100%. I also wanted to offer, that give yourself as much grace and self-compassion as you can, because these changes are happening in real time and you're doing the best that you can. So much in life gets thrown at us and we often judge ourselves according to some made up standard of how we're supposed to handle things. And I don't think that there's a way, as you mentioned, this is an incredibly complex dynamic, and we're talking about these things all of the time, so it seems normal to us, but just really realizing how big of a deal things are, and it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. It's okay to show up however you're showing up. There's not a correct way to move through a transition. I think often we hold ourselves to really high standards, and it's a good thing because it keeps us propelling forward, but it also can be an exhausting thing. And so just again, offer yourself as much grace, self-compassion, and flexibility as you can. You're doing the best that you can, and just be gentle with yourself.